And I'm passing on to you now Jack's best advice to you. And the first one he said he said, I've always tried to follow the golden rule. Now, the golden rule is, treat others as you would like to be treated. And I looked at him and I said, hey, I like this, the golden bear. That's kind of his nickname. The golden bear says the best advice is the golden rule. Treat others like you would like to be treated. I began to learn the power of the golden rule when Time Warner asked me back in 2001 when corporate scandals were happening and there was a lot of distrust, a lot of manipulation. They called me to New York City and said, we want you to write a book on business ethics. And I said, well, I can't do that. And they said, why? I said, because there's no such thing as business ethics. There's just ethics. And then he said, well, can you write a book on ethics? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm not really sure I can, because in a culture that has no truth or no absolutes, I mean, who determines what is ethical? So he said, well, try it. And so I got my research team together and we thought about it and we came up with a good idea and it worked. I wrote a book called Business Ethics 101 and it was all about the golden rule. And what I learned out of that, this was life-changing. The light came on in my life because it was out of that I realized the power and the positive effect that good values have on people. So when Jack Nicklaus at his home said, John, I try to follow the golden rule. That's the best advice I can give, which is great advice. I just thought about a book that Alan Wolfe wrote called Moral Freedom. And this was written back in 2001, right during the corporate scandals. And basically, he said that moral freedom is the belief that life is best when each individual finds his or own morality. In other words, there's not a kind of a stated set morality. You just kind of go out and say what's moral for me and what's moral to me. Now, when I read that book and I thought about the trouble that we were in, the corporate scandals, et cetera, and I thought about Jack Nicklaus's golden rule, treat others as you'd like to be treated, I began to think of what I would call moral freedom assumptions. And they're as follows. If everybody does their own thing, then the assumption is that everything will work out okay for everybody. And if everybody pursues their own economic self-interest, then the economy will thrive for everyone. And if everybody chooses their own family style, then the children will prosper. And we kind of basically said, you just can kind of basically choose your own morality. And the result of that is, stay with me now, the result of choosing your own moral code is that you end up focusing on yourself instead of focusing on others. In other words, you begin to have a selfish perspective of life. What's best for me? What feels good for me? Not what is best for others. Not what is good for others. It's certainly the antithesis of the golden rule. And moral freedom, for me, equals minimum freedom for you. And maximum value for me really means minimum value for you. And you can see this is exactly opposite of what Jack was talking to me in his house that day about the golden rule. And so therefore, I think that's when what I call the Great Divide began. And the Great Divide was personal freedom has become the greatest value of a person's life. And when that happens, all of a sudden, it's not about you anymore. It's all about me and my rights. The result, the trust factor begins to decline. And trust determines behavior. You see, social trust is the confidence that you will do what you ought to do. It's the confidence that I will do what I ought to do. And social trust begins to fail when we do what we want to do, not what we ought to do. And where does the ought come in? Where's the core of social trust? It's in values. It's in the golden rule. Treat others. Think of others. Treat others as you would like to be treated. So when I wrote this book on the golden rule, I realized it was accepted by most cultures and religions in the world. It was easy to understand. It was certainly bigger than my own personal situation. It always valued people, and it created trust. And what happens is good values develop our core. And when we become When we become better on the inside, we become better on the outside. When we become bigger on the inside, we become bigger on the outside. It all begins on the inside. And when Jack gave us that advice of following the golden rule, I just thought, Jack, you have a core. You have a core that makes you stand up straight. By the way, what we've discovered is, when you think of kids and social media, a lot of social media is wanting validation from somebody, kind of almost ridiculously, people you don't even know. You're wanting to kind of okay you and say you're okay and give you a thumbs up. And what we've discovered is that the more good values I have on the inside, the less validation I need from the outside. When I have good values inside of me, I don't really need a lot of validation from other people. And it's the opposite is also true. The less values I have on the inside, the more validation I seek on the outside. So this is incredible advice given to us by Jack. And so thank you. It's just beautiful. It's advice about values, the golden rule, which should be the heart and the core of our life. And then Jack, he said, but there's something else I tell young golfers, and I leaned into him especially for this because, he is the greatest golfer ever. And he said, but when I'm around young golfers, there's something I always want to make sure that they grab hold of and they learn, because he said it'll really help them. And I said, well, Jack, what was it? And he gave me this advice. He said, I tell young golfers, and he's telling all of us now because I'm passing on to you what he said to me, understand yourself. And so I said, well, let's talk about it. And he said, well, John, let's talk about the game of golf. He said, the game of golf management begins by managing yourself. And you can't manage yourself until you understand yourself. And so he said, when I share with golfers that they need to understand themselves, what I'm saying is, don't let anybody put their game on you. So if you're playing with a long hitter, don't use more club or maybe more power in your swing to kind of keep up with who they are and what they're doing. He said, no. He said, you have to understand yourself, and that means you have to be yourself. And he said the first step of becoming a better golfer is to become a better you. And I thought, boy, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Just kind of understand yourself, and if you can understand yourself, you can understand your golf game. If you can understand yourself, it helps you understand your family relationships. It helps you understand your business relationships. And then he said something else. He said, understanding yourself not only means be yourself or kind of like be comfortable in your own skin. He said, accept yourself. Carl Rogers said that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. I love that. Really, change becomes impossible in my life until I can accept myself for who I am, my strengths, my weaknesses, the good side, the bad side, the ups, the downs, that whole process. So I was reading the other day, thinking about this lesson I wanted to give to you and the advice from Jack. I was reading the other day that there's a difference between knowing and understanding. In other words, you can know a lot about something and not really understand it at all. Understanding myself means that I'm comfortable in my skin, and that means that I know who I am. If I know who I am, that gives me identity. If I accept who I am, it gives me security. If I enjoy who I am, it gives me fulfillment. If I improve who I am, it gives me growth. And if I share who I am, it gives me a connection with other people. And so I think of Jack in our conversation that day, and follow the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated, and understand yourself. Just kind of know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and play within that which makes you feel comfortable, which makes you feel good, and which makes you feel right.